Hi, welcome to Ms. Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 1.25, Results of World War I. It includes information aligned with the final section of your study guide. Remember, you controlled this lecture. Make sure you're using your study guide to help you take the notes and come with any questions to class that you might have. Let's go ahead and get started. World War I was one of the most brutal wars to date. Not because the individuals were more hateful or terrible than in any other wars, but because of the styles of fighting and the technology that was developed during the time. And it was used for the first time. First, the style of fighting used in World War I was adapted from earlier fighting, but with new technologies it became more and more deadly. They used trench warfare to fight one another. Trench warfare was a modified version of line up across from each other and shoot that early armies used. Because they now had machine guns, poison gas, barbed wire, and landmines, each army would dig trenches to help protect themselves while shooting at one another. They'd dig these long holes that were 6 to 8 feet deep and protected by barbed wire and separated by this area of no man's land. These trenches would be connected to one another for miles and miles, creating a line of defense in case of an attack. Troops actually lived in them, underground, for months at a time. To attack the other side, one side would storm across the no man's land in the middle with their tanks and soldiers, while being shot at with machine guns. They would have to cross minefields, dead bodies, and barbed wire, then face bayonets. They would use poison gas and flamethrowers on the enemies in the trenches, as well as hand grenades. All of this led to high fatalities in the war. For the first time, submarines and airplanes were also an active part of the war. Submarines and U-boats were used to stop supplies from getting to the enemy. Airplanes romanticized the idea of war through these mid-air battles of flying aces. Do you remember Snoopy fighting the Red Baron? Well, the Red Baron was actually a real World War I German flying ace. The pilots would drop bombs behind enemy lines, and although it was severely inaccurate and they often missed altogether, it still was a way of romanticizing war. They'd also face off with one another in mid-air battles using pistols and hand grenades to try to wreck or ground the other pilot and his plane. All these technologies led to higher fatalities and injuries than ever before. In addition, new medical advancements meant wounds that previously had been fatal were not. World War I actually created a large number of amputees and other permanently injured soldiers that countries were unequipped and unprepared to care for. With both sides doing the same things, no one side had an advantage. This led to years of stalemate until the U.S. entered the war in 1917. With fresh troops, more supplies, and 3 years to plan for the war, the Allied side, Russia, Britain, France, and now the U.S., had a clear advantage. The Central Powers, Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, knew they would eventually lose. Tired and worn down, the two sides agreed to an armistice in November of 1918. An armistice is a ceasefire. Neither side actually wins, both just agree to stop fighting and sign a peace treaty. President Woodrow Wilson called for a fair treaty among the sides. The European allies worried about Germany's strength and wanted to punish them and weaken them. Wilson created a plan called the 14 Points that he believed would lead to lasting world peace. Some of the points were no secret treaties, freedom of the seas, reduction of all militaries, and a League of Nations to solve any conflicts between nations. Only one of Wilson's proposed points was placed in the Treaty of Versailles, and the treaty that ended World War I. That was the League of Nations. This group was a precursor to the United Nations that we have today, where all the countries meet and develop peaceful solutions to disagreements between countries. The problem with the League of Nations was that they had no actual power to enforce their solutions. The rest of the treaty included ways to punish and weaken Germany. It took away Germany's military, took away mining and manufacturing, took territory from them, and made Germany pay reparations, or war damages, for all their losses in the war. All of these hurt the German economy and eventually allowed Hitler to gain power in Germany, which caused World War II. So World War I is actually a cause of World War II. Due to the severe treatment of Germany at the Treaty of Versailles, the U.S. Senate actually ended up refusing to ratify the treaty. That meant that the U.S. did not accept it. It also meant that the U.S. never joined the League of Nations that Wilson had actually made up. Their own president was the one who created it. So in 1918, the war ended, Germany was punished unfairly, and the U.S. went back to isolationism for 2 decades. This is the end of U.S. Notes 1.25. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, make sure that you bring those to class with you tomorrow.